You ever buy something that comes with a little extra you didn't bargain for? A boat slip that includes a neighborhood feud? I did. I bought a small lake house on a sleepy reservoir that everyone in the subdivision had been whispering about for years. Private docks, HOA rules, and enough petty politics to fill a courtroom. I thought I was getting peace. What I actually bought was a war zone with a water view. The lake was the kind of place that looks perfect in photos. Glassy mornings, mist hovering over the surface, families launching kayaks at dawn. The listing said private lake access. The seller handed me paperwork and a smile and mentioned that the HOA and the county had some ongoing discussions about access rights. I tucked that into a folder and moved in, thinking I could handle whatever old drama was left behind with a little normal neighborly charm. Turns out, some ongoing discussions was HOA speak for a decades-long battle over who gets to use the water. The previous owner had been fighting the HOA for years. Letters, cease and desists, and a couple of court filings that seemed to fracture into more paperwork than progress. I assumed it was local nonsense. I didn't realize that under all the bylaw gossip, there was a legal seam that runs straight out of local control into federal territory. First Sunday we were there, I took my family down to the shore. I had my new pontoon strapped to the trailer, an old appliance of joy that promised sunset cruises and lazy weekends. We hitched it down the private lane, and I backed into my small, newly built launch. The neighbors were out. Wave, nod, the usual. Then I heard the hum of a golf cart, and the HOA president rolled up like she'd been waiting for us. She was polite at first, all protocol and polite smiles. "You know the rules," she said. Like rules were a thing you memorized before joining a book club. "This community has private access," she reminded me. I smiled and said I owned the property with the dock. That's when the voice stiffened. "You don't have permission to launch a boat here," she said. "You have to register with the association and sign the waiver." I asked her to show me the clause in the covenants that prohibited my use. She produced a printed excerpt and read it aloud like a scripture. But the words were fuzzy, defined terms, ambiguous boundaries, owner this and association that. I asked for the recorded plat, the easement language, the deed. She frowned. "That's all being handled by our council," she said. "We'll inform you in writing." That should have been the end of it. Friendly bureaucracy, a little paperwork. But a week later, I found a letter under my door. A dated notice from the HOA board telling me to cease and desist from launching boats or accessing the common beachfront until their attorney completed a review. It was passive-aggressive in its tone and aggressive in its intent. I called a real estate attorney and paid for a quiet, short legal explanation. My deed included shoreline access. The recorded plat showed a fee-simple interest to the riparian strip, and at the very least the county had to be notified before anyone could restrict my use. That's when the HOA called 911. I still can't wrap my head around the decision. They called 911 and reported a trespasser violating an ongoing HOA order. Within 20 minutes, a patrol car rolled up to the gravel, two officers stepping out with polite, professional looks. They asked questions, wrote notes, and then, most disheartening for a man who had imagined a quiet retirement by the water, left with a little sympathy and a lot of paperwork about pending civil matters. The officers didn't arrest anyone. This was civil, not criminal. But it made the whole operation feel official, like a spotlight had been shown on my little life. After the call, the HOA ramped up their tactics. Security cameras facing my dock, stern letters delivered by certified mail, and at a neighborhood meeting where I tried to speak, half the audience clapped when the president told me we were out of order, whatever that meant in the courts of local morality. I was angry, sure, but mostly I was tired. I wanted to diffuse things without spending my retirement savings in lawyers' fees. I wanted weekends of coffee on the deck, not hearings. So I did something most people think of as dramatic, but didn't realize was clever until later. I called a lawyer who understood water law, not just covenants. That distinction mattered. My lawyer explained that certain waters fall under federal jurisdiction, navigable waters. There's a doctrine, old but alive, that the federal government has authority over bodies of water used or suitable for interstate commerce. And even when a lake is private on paper, if it connects to streams or is used for recreational boating that crosses state lines or supports commerce, federal law can apply. He told me, if your lake qualifies as navigable in fact or affects navigable waters, the Clean Water Act, the Rivers and Harbors Act, or even the public trust doctrine could be relevant. The point is, local restrictions can't override federal rights. He also explained something else I hadn't expected. Federal waterways have to be accessible, and the federal government can preempt private restrictions that interfere with navigation or public access when certain criteria are met. That's when I started digging. Titles, plat maps, historical records, old timber receipts, the thing the previous owner had tried to bury in paperwork. The lake's outlet connected to a creek that ultimately ran into a navigable river. There were historical records showing barges had passed through in the late 1800s. Old doesn't mean current, but it shows a pathway. Armed with copies of deeds and an easy-to-read map, my lawyer and I prepared a measured, calm response. We didn't threaten or scream. We wrote a letter that said, in plain language, that the property included riparian access and that federal waterways law might preempt any HOA attempt to bar me from using the water. We asked for an amicable resolution, registration with reasonable rules, not exclusion. The HOA's board council responded with more legalese. They insisted they had authority to manage common areas and that the letter was premature. The back and forth escalated like a tennis match. They filed a demand for declaratory relief asking the county court to confirm the HOA's rights. We answered, depositions, discovery. These words are expensive because they translate to billable hours. I'd already dipped into savings, and my blood pressure dipped a few notches lower every time another invoice arrived. But then something surprising happened. The HOA got nervous. Not because I had deep pockets. Because the HOA's council realized our map showed a navigable connection strong enough that if they pushed, they could wake up a federal agency. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the Army Corps of Engineers, listeners who don't like being treated like side characters in local dramas, could step in. The HOA's council whispered to their board, and the board whispered to the neighbors, and whispers travel faster than legal notices in small towns. The HOA took a different tack. Instead of a lawsuit that might bring federal scrutiny, they started posting signs, for residents only, and hired private security to enforce beach hours. They thought they could make the problem go away by wearing down my resolve. I kept my cool. I continued to launch my boat at times when no one was around, always careful, always respectful, always sticking to the laws. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted resolution. Then, late one summer afternoon, a new event blew everything wide open. A family from a neighboring town launched a small sailboat at the far end of the lake and used the connected creek to head downstream. They weren't doing anything unusual, just a family outing. But they crossed into navigable waters on a rainy week when a state inspector happened to be doing routine checks downstream. That inspector filed a report noting transient recreational use linking the lake to a navigable river. That little report was the match the HOA had tried to avoid. Within days, a representative from the Army Corps of Engineers called the HOA president. She sounded calm but firm. The Corps wanted to evaluate whether the lake constituted a water of the United States for certain regulatory purposes. The mere interest of a federal agency changes the tenor. Overnight, the neighborhood gossip turned into cautious phone calls. The HOA's fight turned into a corporate council scramble. When the HOA realized federal attention might determine the outcome of their bylaws, their posture shifted from combative to conciliatory. They offered to mediate, to form a usage committee, to recognize my right to launch, but only under strict registration. I agreed. Reasonable rules about noise, hours, and safety, not exclusion. The HOA wanted me to sign an indemnity. I had my lawyer revise it so it didn't ask me to waive rights. But then the HOA did something I didn't expect. They tried to preempt federal jurisdiction by passing a rule that claimed broader authority over all lakeside owners, an attempt to make private rules appear more binding. That's when I pushed back. I notified the Corps. I sent them our correspondence. I asked for clarity. I pointed to the map, the connecting creek, and the inspector's report. I said plainly I wanted to use my property without being harassed. A week later, I had a letter in hand. Not a threat, but an official note saying the Corps had no immediate plan to assert jurisdiction but advised all parties to seek a local solution consistent with federal regulations. It wasn't a slam dunk for me, but it was enough leverage. The HOA, afraid of litigation that could involve federal determinations and the PR nightmare of being seen as trying to lock citizens off a waterway, backed down. That's when things got strange but simple. The HOA president stopped calling 911. Security cameras were repositioned. The board implemented a modest registration process that required a copy of my deed and a small fee to cover administrative costs. No exclusion. We signed the agreement my lawyer approved. We shook hands. The neighborhood sighed in relief. I breathed. But the story doesn't end with a handshake and a sunset. There are lessons people don't teach you when you first buy property. First, property isn't just a plot on a map. It's a node in a system: hydrology, history, and law. Second, bureaucracy and power often hide in plain sight inside polite language. The difference between being civil and being excluded can come down to a line in a recorded plat or a clause in an old deed. I didn't gloat. I didn't trap anyone. I used the law not as a weapon, but as a shield, an instrument to remind the HOA that some things live above neighborhood politics. Federal law isn't about being mean. It's about standards and lines that prevent local bylaws from trampling rights when bigger rules apply. If you try to skirt that, you invite agencies that don't like being ignored. People ask if I was scared the HOA would retaliate. For a bit, yes. They had power here: neighbors, votes, rules. But there's a difference between the power of suggestion and the power of law. When communities overreach, the law is the place you go to rebalance power. My case wasn't about being a hero. It was about wanting the same thing most people want: to enjoy the property you paid for without being bullied. A few months later, I hosted a small barbecue at the dock. The HOA president came with her husband. We toasted with cheap beer and a shared joke about everyone's stubbornness. The kids splashed in the shallows. The morning mist rose like a curtain on a scene I had once bought with a naive heart. I looked across the water and felt something like gratitude, not for the victory, but for a simple, restored normal: my right to launch a boat, to breathe, to be part of the lake that I now understood was part of something bigger. If you ever find yourself in a similar skirmish, don't let fear push you into reckless moves. Document everything. Know your deeds. Talk to someone who understands the specific kind of law involved. Sometimes local counsel isn't enough. And remember that making a scene doesn't always mean making enemies. Sometimes it means making sure everyone follows the same rules. The HOA still grumbles when a party gets loud. The president still trims the hedges like she's filing a report card. But the days of them calling 911 over a family afternoon are gone. We found a solution that keeps the peace without erasing rights. And when the sun sets over that glassy water now, I watch my pontoon drift and I think about the ridiculousness of how a little body of water can hold such big human stories: pride, fear, stubbornness, and ultimately, a small, quiet compromise that lets a neighborhood live beside the lake instead of against it.